So inshallah, our next speaker is Sister Megan Wyatt. So Megan Wyatt converted to Islam at the age of 19 and has a degree in Middle Eastern Studies. She is a wife and homeschooling mother with 4 children residing in South California with her husband. She has been coaching and teaching Muslims since 2007, as well as being a contributor to the online platforms and speaking at Muslim conferences in North America. She is a multi-passionate woman who has founded Wives of Jannah, an organization that offers relationship coaching for wives and couples, as well as training programs and events. She is also a co-founder of a new program called Wives of Jannah, in which she teaches Muslim women how to go through the marriage process and find the right man without compromising on their values as Muslim women. Her latest project is One Meaningful Life, where Megan is creating an Islamic personal development space for Muslims. So please give her a warm welcome of applause. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, I bear witness there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is his last and final messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, or as we say in Arabic, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. M. Scott Peck, the famous author of the book The Road Less Traveled, said, I define love thus: the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own growth or another's spiritual growth. Now, this is one of the most beautiful definitions of love that I have ever come across. And in fact, I would say it encompasses what I believe about love and what I teach about love and what I teach about love within an Islamic framework. Because if you were to try to translate what it means when you tell someone, I love you for the sake of Allah, this is how I would translate it: the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And beyond that, within Islam, marriage, which is what we're talking about in this session, has a very specific goal. And that goal shapes everything that I teach and everything that I do. And that goal is laid out to us in the Quran in an ayah which we all know so very, very well. And among his signs is this: that he created for you mates from among yourselves, that you might dwell with them in tranquility. And he has put love and mercy between your hearts. And verily in that are signs for those who reflect. So very specifically, there is a direct connection between love and spirituality. And this is, if you will, the goal, the framework of marriage. But if we were to extend even beyond that, we have this hadith, also very well known, that the Prophet ﷺ said, the most complete of the believers in faith are those with the most excellent character, and the best of you are the best in behavior to their women, or sometimes translated as to their wives. So again, love and the spiritual connection is present. And the fact that the closer you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more it will show up in your character, in your behavior, and very specifically, we have a gold standard here in Islam. This standard isn't set by anybody else except the Prophet ﷺ. And that standard is that for men to be treating their wives or those in their care with the best of the possible best of their character. And that is a direct reflection of how close they are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Islam sets for us standards that are actually very high when it comes to marriage, but they're not unrealistic. And it sets for us goals that are very lofty, but they are not unachievable. And so it is for this reason that it is such a blessing that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a married man. He was a family man because he lived all of these ideas in his relationships. He displayed love, he displayed mercy, he displayed what M. Scott Peck described as what love is, which is to ultimately nourish somebody else's spiritual development and their spiritual growth. So the question we ask ourselves is, how is it that good people who start off with the best of intentions in marriage end up in a situation where they're no longer not only not loving each other, but the mercy has all but disappeared from the relationship? How do people end up in this situation? Some of you in here, you're married, but you know that there is so much more that's possible for your relationship. You want so much more. Some of you in here are married and you say alhamdulillah every day for your spouse, but you wonder if there's something you need to know in order to prevent that relationship from slowly unraveling. Some of you in here are single and you want to get married and you want to have a successful marriage, and you're asking, how is it that I can set myself up for success? Is there something I need to know? Because maybe you've heard stories that have scared you, stories that have deterred you. And there are some of you in this room, you've got one foot in the door and you've got one foot out the door. And you're asking, can my marriage be saved? Or is the right thing to do to separate and move on? For every single category, here's our reality as human beings. We are always going to struggle. Because when you bring two imperfect people together in a relationship, there is going to be challenges. How can there not be? We are imperfect servants of God struggling in this life. But while there will be challenges, there most certainly should never be suffering. Marriage is not about suffering. So ups and downs, yes. Joy, intimacy, happiness, yes. Challenges, moments you wake up, you look at your spouse and you think, why did I marry this person? Probably. It happens. But there shouldn't be suffering, the overarching goal. And so if people loved like M. Scott Peck described love, if people loved the way the Prophet ﷺ defined love, if men treated their wives with the utmost care, if they were the leaders of the home which Allah made them, then would we be surprised to find our households filled with love and mercy? And even if not passion, even if not passionate love, but there would be mercy and kindness. And the answer is probably yes. You'll all have to bear with me a little bit with my voice because as you can see, I'm talking a lot today and I have a cold. Alhamdulillah. So make dua for me to get through this, inshallah. So what I want to present to all of you is a few things. First, I want to share with you 5 case studies of wives and couples that I have personally worked with. And I'm going to tell you what their challenges were when they came in for marriage help. Then I'm going to share with you, out of all the things that I have done with others, of all the relationship advice that is out there, what are the 3 most important elements that can turn any relationship around? Then we'll come back to those 5 case studies, and I will tell you what the solutions were to their challenges. After that, I'm going to share with you some specific situations where special help may be needed in relationships. And after that, we'll end, and inshallah, with time, if we have it, I will be happy to take your questions. So let's start with 5 case studies. These are 5 different individuals or couples that I worked with, and each of them had a different challenge. I've given them all nicknames, none of them you know. The first one was Amina. Now, in Amina's case, her husband was not initiating or responding to her needs for sexual intimacy at all. She felt lonely, she felt unloved, and she knew that this wasn't normal. She felt like her husband's job took total precedence over her needs. He wasn't comfortable talking about intimacy. And so when she came to me for help, she said, I think I'm ready to get divorced. Because she said, I know that any other man on the planet would be happy to have me as a wife, but my husband isn't interested in me. The second wife, we'll call her Lena. Lena said she felt suffocated in her relationship. She was many years down the road, married with kids, and she said, I look at my husband, I can't stand him anymore. She says, I'm not attracted to him. Everything he does gets under my skin. And she said, when I asked her, what is the one thing you think I can help you with? You know what she said? Convince me not to get divorced. Wow, first call, within the first 30 minutes, I'm like, hey, no small order there, right? She said, tell me not to get divorced. Convince me not to leave. Because she was absolutely certain that there was no point to this marriage anymore. The third couple, we'll call them the Sharif couple, lovely couple from Pakistan. This particular couple, the husband and wife were bickering all the time. They were constantly arguing with each other. Every small thing became a disagreement. They were arguing in front of their little 3-year-old son. I also learned that they never ate together as a family. The toddler ate looking at the iPad, and the parents ate looking at the television. So they didn't connect at all. And basically, they were getting to the point where they just couldn't go through a day without arguments. And so the husband signed them up as a couple for couples coaching and said, we want to change our pattern. The fourth example, I'll call them the Sayyid couple. In this particular situation, the wife had experienced sexual abuse in her past. And so now that she was married, that past was now impacting her present. She was no longer in a situation where she felt she could respond to her husband. Anytime he was showing interest in her sexually, she felt afraid, she felt triggered, but she didn't communicate any of that to him because she didn't know how. So instead, she was constantly rejecting him, criticizing him, blaming him, bad timing, you're selfish, basically putting him down all the time. And they were both hurting. And so she came because she said, I need some help. And the last couple, we'll call them the Baker couple. In this situation, the husband had a certain way of connecting with his family. This was a family who bonded by making fun of each other, putting each other down, sort of, jeering with each other's elbows. And so it turned out that when she got married, the family also had no problem making fun of her too. And so the whole family would make jokes and laugh at her expense. Her mother-in-law would compete with her. So for example, if she made lasagna at the family dinner, 2 weeks later, the mother-in-law also made lasagna, put it down on the table, and proceeded to tell everybody why her lasagna was so much better than her daughter-in-law's. And this just kept going on, this silly one-upmanship and the jokes at her expense. And she had tried to tell her husband how she felt. But he thought she just needed to lighten up. He told her, you don't really know what you're talking about. My mom doesn't do that kind of stuff. And it wasn't until his brother and his brother's wife separated, because that wife had the same complaint as his wife, that my client realized, she said, I'm not crazy. She left for the same reason. And so these are 5 case studies. So the question is, how do you turn relationships around when people are at the edge, when they're at the brink, when they can't stand each other anymore? How do we take people from the extreme of, please turn my marriage around, I want to get divorced, to back to a happy couple? And so what I want to transition to, we're going to come back to their solutions, are 3 elements. So if you're taking notes, I've got 3 points that I really want you to remember. The 3 elements that I think are most important for any relationship. If you are not married, by the way, in this room, I am going to be talking within the context of marriage, but these 3 elements are applicable to any important relationship you have with your children, with your parents, with your siblings, with your friends. So all of it's applicable, it just changes a little, okay? And that first element is that love is an action. You might have heard this statement before, that love is a verb. It's an action. And what that means is that in order for people to experience a fantastic relationship, they have to be willing to put their love into constant and consistent actions. In fact, I would say that if you want to have a fantastic marriage, you have to have daily, conscious commitment to daily loving action. And what happens with couples, where they get stuck, is that one person is waiting for the other spouse to go first. Well, I'll do nice things for him if, he'll do nice things for me. Well, I would give her the world if she would just do this for me first. And what happens when you have 2 people who love each other and care about each other, but they're both withholding their love? They're both waiting for the other to go first. What happens? You get into like this holding pattern, right? And the relationship just unravels and small issues become big issues because why? No one's giving love. If you could learn one thing and nothing else and leave this room, it is this, is that love is in action. It's not up here. It's not just how you feel. It's what you do. And so with that, I want to actually share 2 myths about love that continue to hurt relationships consistently for generations, but ongoing. Some of this you might have heard, but I want to give you a different spin on some of it. And the first one is this idea that falling in love means staying in love. We put a lot of stake in the idea of falling in love, right? That if you fall in love with the right person, then everything after is going to be easy. But here's the thing. I hate to take the magic out of falling in love, okay? But I'm going to. There's a few examples of, like, I saw him from across the grocery store aisle, and then that was it. They were married for 50 years after that, right? Sometimes you hear these, like, single stories, and some of you may know someone like that. Most falling in love, actually, before I tell you the formula, almost every person in here, if you were to be honest, and I said, were you ever in love when you were 13, 14, 15? Mostly everyone felt at some point when they were younger like they were in love with someone. The culture at large, the reason boy bands continue to exist is because teenage girls think they are madly in love with someone, right? And boy bands sing about their love and they listen to it over and over again and they think about him, right? Okay, this is real. Teenagers fall in love. Falling in love is easy. And the formula for it is 3 things. You ready? Proximity, sexual chemistry, and a little bit of vulnerability. That's it. If you're around someone enough, and there's attraction between the 2 of you in some way, and there's a little bit of vulnerability, like even if you don't talk, like you get dressed looking really sharp and nice, hoping the other person may pass by on the other side of the conference and they happen to see you and you're curious if they like the way you look, that's vulnerability. Those 3 things create falling in love. But feelings of love are not enough to sustain love. Okay? Feelings of love. Because what happens when the falling in love period goes away, one of the really negative things the elders will say is, oh yeah, you're the beginning of the marriage, it's so lovely after that, it's like a nosedive, it's terrible. That's not true. Marriage should be amazing and passionate and wonderful the entire longevity of your life. So don't listen to that stuff. When people tell you that, those are people who do not know how to actually love in action and really take action to develop the relationship that they want, okay? But what it does say is that you're going to have to go back to element number 1. Because once falling in love disappears, that's where the actions of love show up. And the actions of love say, I'm going to do this for you because I love you. Because I want you to feel good. Because I want you to feel amazing. Because I want you to feel like the most special person on the face of this earth. Because I want you in sajda making dua for me. That's love. And actions sustain. So this is the first myth, okay? The second one is that real love doesn't have problems. I recently watched, anybody in here ever seen those Red Table Talks that are on Facebook? Red Table Talk fans? Yeah? Okay. There's been some pretty cool ones about love. And one of the recent ones, Jada was talking to some individuals about love, and there was a single gentleman at the table, and he espoused this exactly. He said, you know, nobody wants to stay together. As soon as there's a problem, people are out. Now, obviously, they're talking about dating culture. It's a little bit different, but it still applies. And he basically said, you know, when things start to get rough, isn't that a sign that I'm with the wrong person? And all the women at the table were like, oh my God, no. And they basically gave him a full-on intervention. But this belief right here, even in popular TV shows, here and there I've seen shows, they're getting better at showing the messy side of marriage. But within like months of people having these fantastic, glorious weddings, they're like hitting a rough patch and they're like, I'm done with this. I'm tired of you, I'm out. And here's the thing. Like I said in the beginning, we are flawed human beings. Is there any way that 2 people can come together in a relationship and not have some issues? As Muslims, do we not believe that everything in this life will have tests and trials, yes or no? Why with love do we think it's going to be flawless? In fact, what I would say is that marriage is literally the best personal development journey you could ever take. After that, it's having children. Your spouse will be pre-programmed to unearth things within you that you need to heal. Your spouse will be pre-programmed to unearth ideas within you that need released. Your spouse will be pre-programmed to challenge the value system you came with, to challenge the ideas you developed growing up. And then your kids are like even more pre-programmed, right? So ultimately, marriage, relationships of any significance, it's not just marriage, relationships of any significance, they invite us to grow. And so if none of you knew that, let me be the first to tell you now. If you want a thriving relationship, you're going to have to grow. Because if not, you're going to be in pain. And that's just the reality of love. And that brings me to my next point. Investing in knowing yourself and knowing your spouse. So now practically, how do you grow as a person in a practical sense? What do you need to do? There's my quote. Marriage is the ultimate personal development journey, right? What are some of the ways that I help people go from a place of not knowing themselves, not knowing each other, not understanding the challenges to practically moving forward? You can write these down. The first thing is that I ask, let's say I'm working with a couple, and I'll ask the husband, hey, what does your wife really desire? Like, what does she really, really want? What would make her feel totally alive? The second question is similar to this, but what would make her feel special? What would make her feel significant? And equally important is the third question. What causes her to feel unloved or to feel disrespected? And the fourth one's also really important. What opens up her baggage? Because here's the thing. When you get married, you come with baggage. Every single one of us has baggage. All of us. There is no exception. And what happens is you have one person who says, yes, my spouse has all the baggage, but I came with nothing. Totally not true. You've got baggage. And the first person who thinks they don't have baggage probably has the most baggage, right? That's just kind of how it works. We're people, right? Life is hard. You have experienced trauma in your life. You have experienced pain. You have experienced confusion. You have experienced moments. We are all like works in progress, right? And so we come to relationships flawed people. And some of us have certain buttons that if pushed, it opens up the past, and the past merges with the present. It's important to know what the baggage is in your relationship. So if right now, if you're married and you don't know the answer to these 4 questions with your spouse, I invite you to do some work. But I haven't let you off the hook yet, and here's why, okay? You also have to be able to answer these questions too. What do you deeply desire from your spouse? Because here's the thing, when I work with people in relationship counseling, right? I ask somebody, what do you want? I am so sick of this. I'm so fed up with this. I'm just so done. I don't want this anymore. Negative, 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 negative. I go, stop. Hold on. I understand. I asked you, what do you want? And there's usually silence. What action would your wife do that would make you feel awesome every week? What action could your husband do that would make you feel super significant? These are the kind of questions we have to be able to answer. Love is an action. So you've got to be able to answer this for yourself. What buttons, what opens up your baggage? What brings your stuff out on the table? What makes you feel disrespected? What makes you feel amazing? And that amazing question is so important. Because if you don't know what would make you feel super loved, super cherished, super respected, super admired, then there's probably a good chance your spouse has no idea either. And so practically speaking, being able to answer what looks like 4 little questions, I think some of you will realize, can be life-changing. It can turn a relationship completely around. Because for the first time, somebody finally says the one thing that would make them feel awesome. And their spouse says, I can do that. So, oh, you can? Great. And suddenly, like 15 years of arguments are gone. And that brings me to the third most important element for all relationships. No matter what book you read about marriage, there are millions and millions of videos on YouTube, right, about relationships. You could watch all of them. No matter what relationship guru you go to, pay for them and go sit in their conference. If you are not able to be vulnerable as a person, you cannot implement any single piece of golden advice. You can't follow the Prophet ﷺ. You can't follow his examples that are laid out in the seerah so clearly. You can't implement the ayah from the Quran of love and mercy. You can't answer these 4 questions for yourself. You can't have the time and patience to ask your spouse and learn who they are because you can't be vulnerable. I'm going to save that one for a second. Let's talk about vulnerability a little bit more. The Prophet ﷺ was a vulnerable man, and I want to give you an example of how I know this. When he saw Angel Jibreel for the first time, he came home. And he came home and he asked Khadija, may Allah be pleased with her, to cover him up. And he told her, he said, I'm afraid that something bad is going to happen to me, right? He was fully honest about how he felt. And we love him and we love that moment because of how real he was. And it's because of that moment where Khadija told him those beautiful lines. Forgive me, I don't have them memorized, but I think some of you know them by heart. But basically, she told the Prophet ﷺ that Allah would never disgrace you. He would never disgrace you. You're good to the poor. And she went on and listed all of the beautiful things that he does. And we love that moment in time, don't we? And when you learn this hadith about the Prophet ﷺ coming home and what Khadija said, was it Khadija who narrated that hadith to us? No. Khadija didn't narrate that hadith to us. Aisha narrates that hadith to us, which means he told the entire story all over again to Aisha years later with full detail. Today, we would call that insecurities, especially for men. You got to pretend like you got it all together. But he told Aisha all over again that he was shaking, that he was covered, he thought something bad was going to happen, what Khadija said, how he felt, the whole thing, he told her all over again. And then even beyond that, the Prophet ﷺ, another time we know he saw Jibreel alayhi salam. He said he looked up in the sky and everywhere he looked, he saw him. And after that experience, he went home again and he asked his wife again, cover him up, right? And later this is where we have the ayah of arise and warn will come, right? That specific hadith is narrated by a male companion, Jabir ibn Abdullah, I believe, which means the Prophet ﷺ then told his feelings, that he was afraid, that he was shaking, now to a male companion. The Prophet ﷺ was a real human being, the best of them all, but vulnerability was definitely one of his qualities. And it's a necessity for your relationship. And so in my work through the years, I've created a definition. It's a little bit wordy, I apologize. But ultimately, this is how I define it in a marriage, that it is creating opportunities to give and receive deep and meaningful love by practicing the art of raw honesty, emotional and physical vulnerability, and a safe and respectful relationship despite any of the deep fears you have that would hold you back. Because without vulnerability, you can't say, I'm sorry, I messed up. Without vulnerability, you can't say, I'm being triggered right now by something from my past, it's not you. Without vulnerability, you can't tell your spouse what your deepest fears are so they can comfort you. Without vulnerability, marriages cannot be the passionate, deeply connected places that they deserve to be. And vulnerability is an art. It's something you learn, it's something you develop. Vulnerability is not telling your spouse off. Vulnerability is telling your spouse when you think they're amazing. You look good today. I had a thought about you yesterday. I was making dua for you. It would be, you know what? I know we're so busy, but if in Dreamland, I wish we could take a vacation together for the weekend and spend the entire weekend just cuddled up with each other in a bed. That's vulnerability. It's saying all the good things that you're afraid to say because you're worried you'll be taken advantage of. Now, in summary, those 3 elements: love is an action. You need to invest in knowing yourself and your spouse. and fearless vulnerability. Now let's talk about how we applied this to the 5 case studies in the beginning. Do you remember Amina? Her husband was not responding to her request for intimacy. Their solution was very simple. They scheduled intimacy. Where pop culture says that scheduling intimacy is actually what kills passion, and this couple, it solved everything. Because her husband worked very long hours. He was a doctor. He was exhausted from work. He just didn't have the energy for his wife. It wasn't that he wasn't interested in her, he was just tired. He had a few other issues as well we had to work through, but in a nutshell, the moment they scheduled intimacy with each other, he knew that that day of the week, for those amount of hours, he was going to be 110% focused on his wife. And she knew that day of the week, for those number of hours, she was going to receive his full focus. And it literally turned their marriage around. Something so simple as 3 hours scheduled once a week around the baby's nap time. And then all the other issues they thought they had became so much easier to deal with. Lena, remember Lena? She felt suffocated. She felt like she couldn't stand her husband anymore. She thought she didn't like him. Really interesting. Turns out that Lena resented her husband because he was living out his dreams and she was not. She was seeing him advance in his career, his own development, but she hadn't. She hadn't furthered her studies. She hadn't furthered her hobbies. And it wasn't because she couldn't. She just had let them go. They had 3 kids. They were busy. And so the first thing that she did was she started scheduling 1 night a week to go out alone with her friends, or 1 night a week to sit home and read a book. Whatever it was, she needed her own me time. She needed to take care of herself. Over time, she decided to go back to school. She enrolled in an online master's program. And literally, by just doing those few things, suddenly she realized that the problem with her husband had nothing to do with him. They are back to being happy in love. She's like, he's totally handsome. They're attracted to each other. Everything is fantastic. But because she was resenting him for what she couldn't do herself, her heart was blocked. And a blocked heart cannot experience passionate connection. The third couple, the Sharif couple from Pakistan, they were bickering all the time, remember? So there's a few really interesting solutions here. One of them was, when I asked the husband, what is the single thing that if your wife did every day on her busiest day, so we're being practical, okay, would make you feel amazing? You know what he said? A bowl on the table when I come home from work of fruit that is pre-washed. I was like, what, really? He said, that's it. She doesn't have to cut it. I just want fresh washed fruit sitting on the table. And he said, when I was growing up as a kid, I didn't have enough money as a family to have like lots of fresh fruit. And he said, so now when I eat fresh fruit, I feel healthy, I feel wealthy, it makes me feel like the man of the house. This was his metaphor, right? And so his wife was like, that's it? Because she cooks and she cooks. He's like, no, I'm not saying, mashallah. He's like, my wife is a great cook, but I don't care about the food as much as the bowl of fruit. And so she started doing that every day, and he felt amazing. On top of that, they decided they were not going to be watching television anymore, and they were going to wean their son off the iPad. They actually started using their kitchen table and looking at each other. Imagine if you looked in your spouse's eyes once a day, what might happen? And we forget that, don't we? And on top of that, they chose a special couch. And they said, this is our fearless vulnerability couch. Whenever we have problems, we're going to sit down only on this couch, and we're going to use your idea of fearless vulnerability. And I have a system as well to help couples go through conversation. And we're going to work things out. And that's what they did. And the couch saved their marriage, turning the TV off did, and the bowl of fresh fruit. And the last, we have a Sayed couple. This was the wife who'd experienced sexual abuse in her past. And so in this case, what the wife learned was that she first had to take responsibility for what had happened to her and how it was impacting her marriage. So not responsibility for the past. In other words, she had to learn how to tell her husband, I'm sorry, it's not you, I'm feeling triggered right now. And the moment she did that, suddenly her husband, rather than feeling like he was a bad guy, something was wrong with him, she's constantly rejecting him, right? He suddenly was her safe place because he knew it wasn't his fault. She wasn't rejecting him. She was struggling because of what had happened in her past. And as a result of her speaking up and being vulnerably honest by saying, I'm triggered, he could respond to her with kindness. And their marriage became a healing place for both of them, and their intimate life completely took off, alhamdulillah, and they're happy thereafter. The last example, the Baker couple. This is the one with the mother-in-law who competed with the daughter-in-law, right? And also the family that made fun of her. So this one was a little bit hard at first because the husband didn't have the ability yet to really listen to someone else's experiences without projecting his own. So in other words, one of the things I want you to remember, you may react differently in a situation, but it doesn't matter. When you're dealing with someone you love, you have to accept that their feelings are their reality. And you have to work with how they feel. And so as he began to do that, he learned that this hurt her feelings, that she's not their daughter, she's not his sister, that when the family made fun of her, it hurt her feelings. And so he learned to place boundaries with his mother. He learned to place boundaries. He said, Mama, we're not going to make fun of her like that. It's not polite for her. And because she saw her husband stand up for her, value her, cherish her, the way the Prophet ﷺ described, then when the mother competed with her for the best brownies or whatever, then she had a sense of humor. Then she was able to say, okay, auntie, like whatever, it's fine, right? Your lasagna is killing it, it's okay. Because she knew her husband had placed a boundary to value her. So in all of these situations, I would call them my success stories. These are 5 success stories. Alhamdulillah, there are many more of those. But not every couple is a success story. Not every relationship I've been able to save. Or when I've left the people, they're in the same mess. And here's why. There are common themes in marriages that aren't thriving, where people are suffering and they're in pain. And their themes ultimately can be summarized like this. You're the problem, I'm fine. You want to get help? You go get the help. I'm good. You think we need marriage therapy? Go fix yourself, the marriage will be great. That kind of ideas, that's it. Not only will there not be love, there won't be mercy. You'll have a marriage contract where people can be married for 50 years, but they can't stand each other. They've missed the entire point, like we started at the beginning of marriage. The point of marriage pointed out in the Quran. The marriage the Prophet ﷺ described, they missed the point. And so this is just kind of a model. The couples who didn't work versus the ones who did. You're the problem, you change, versus someone saying, I'm willing to change and I'm willing to learn. Or someone willing to say, tell me more. I'm upset with you. Okay, tell me more. I don't like the way you do this. Tell me more. I'm fed up with this. Okay, tell me more. Men, it's really fascinating. The longer you listen to your wives and you say, tell me more. Go, tell me more, sweetheart. Keep going. I can take this. Keep going. Bring it on. By the time you're done, you'll have someone crying in your arms because you listened. And you have the capacity to change, but we have to listen. So these are just sort of the comparisons, right? What are you going to give to me versus what can I do to make you happy? Love is always, again, an action. And it's always about, remember we started at the beginning, nourishing someone else. Now, a couple of really quick disclaimer, important points I want to make for everything I just said. There are a few examples of relationships where common marital advice does not apply, where everything I just said does not apply. And I want to make sure we don't leave this room until I finish this. The first one, any marriage where there's emotional abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse. Any marriage where there are addictions, but very specifically sex addictions, including pornography addictions and everything that comes with that. In any relationship where there are unmanaged, keyword unmanaged, mental health challenges, severe anxiety, severe depression, OCD, anorexia, things of this nature. If you have a challenge that's on this list, everything I just said is not the right advice for you. Anything on YouTube or your best, New York Times bestseller list books is not right for you. And everyone in this room will know somebody who needs this information, so this information actually applies to all of you. Because somebody you know in your community or your family or your friend circle, you will need this information for one day, I guarantee it. Here's why these things don't work. If you're dealing with emotional abuse or physical abuse, and also sexual abuse, which yes, takes place in marriage as well, you cannot make it better by being more patient. You can't make it better by making more dua. You can't make it better by trying not to make the person more angry. You can't make it better by giving into all of the demands that they're listing, by basically trying to do every single thing under the sun. You can't make it better by isolating yourself and cutting off resources and friends and family. And you certainly can't make it better by being more, quote-unquote, obedient. The more you try to do these things in an abusive situation, the worse the abuse will get, and the faster the soul of that person starts to disappear. With things like sex addiction, pornography addictions, my husband is actually the founder of purifyyourgaze.com, and so this is also a topic I'm very familiar with. The common and marital advice around this, especially with wives, I have to say, there are women who suffer from this, but I've got to be honest, it's majority women who have husbands struggling with this. The advice is terrible. Trying to have more frequent, relations. Attempting to watch with the spouse what they're looking at. Going on a diet to try to change how you dress, trying to lose weight. The man thinking he needs to get a second wife because he has a high drive. Trying to monitor spouses' internet usage, their phones, their computers, what they're doing to try to trap them ahead of time and stop them. Again, staying in isolation without resources. Sex addiction is a very huge, real problem that is impacting our community in a very, very big way. It is impacting the world. It's not, but it's definitely within the Muslim community. And I need women to understand that there is nothing you can do as a human being by yourself that's going to make it better. And I need the men to understand there's nothing your wife can do also to make it better, no matter if you have one wife, 2, 3, or 4. Because an addiction needs a special kind of intervention. Okay? And it is real. It is not about high need. It is about the inability to actually intimately connect with oneself and another human being, ultimately at its core. And the final one is unmanaged mental health challenges. Ultimately, what I need you to understand is that if somebody has a severe mental health challenge, you cannot replace not just a therapist, but the system that a person needs to be well. You can't be their caretaker. You can't be the person that covers up for them. And again, can you? Yeah, technically you can, but excuse me, I want you to all remember where I began. What is the goal in marriage? Do you remember the Ayah, the Hadith? What is the reason we're together? So again, can 2 people live under a household where somebody suffers? Yes, but I want more for you. And so if there is a major issue with mental health, that also requires special intervention beyond something like what I do, okay? All 3 of these. And so just to reiterate, normal marital challenges, everything I've shared with you can be helped. But if you have something that was on that list, you need special intervention. And I'm sure there are people in your community that can guide you to the proper resources. The last point before I wrap up is to say this. People often say, how can you go and talk to someone else about marital challenges? Isn't that backbiting on my spouse? Isn't that revealing their sins in public? Isn't that dishonoring my family? Where does it show up? Where do I have the right to say, I work with people? Well, that comes from the Quran itself, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And this is so important because Allah is basically telling us in this ayah that, again, you do not need to not only suffer, but do it alone. And if you fear dissension between the two, send an arbitrator from his people and an arbitrator from her people. So somebody she chooses, somebody he chooses. And then if they both desire reconciliation. So if 2 people love each other, like I love you so much, but like I'm hurting. I love you too, but we're hurting. Like you're just hurting each other. And you just don't know how to stop the hurt, but you love each other. You want to be together? That's where you're supposed to. Allah says, bring 2 people. She picks somebody that she feels comfortable with. He picks somebody he feels comfortable with, and you bring them together. And then if it's meant to be, they can reconcile. Allah will cause it between them. And then again, sometimes they're not meant to reconcile, but again, they had the intervention, they had the help, right? So you're not backbiting. You're not revealing sins publicly. You're asking for help, all right? So I just wanted to make sure we leave on that note and understand that Islam is such a practical, beautiful religion. It invites love and passion and intimacy and connection and honor within marriage. It also invites resources and discussion and dialogue and third parties when necessary. Okay? And that brings me back to my final concluding reminder. Again, this quote When I say I love you for the sake of Allah, ultimately, love has a higher purpose. If you say that you love someone, then love them like this. Love them in a way where you support their spiritual development, their spiritual growth. Be the doorway that your spouse comes closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not the doorway where they come closer to Allah making dua against you. Be the doorway that helps somebody become stronger than their iman, like the Prophet ﷺ was in every relationship he had. Thank you. Do you have time for questions? We do not. Do you want to say that? Okay.